open-minded. So how are you? Oh my gosh.
I'm
Um,
good.
yeah, it's been a while. But you've been doing
Yeah.
loads of stuff. So I apologies for I can't believe that we never had a conversation before and you never came on the podcast. And I don't know how that was an oversight. Um, but I'm glad that you're here and thank you for taking the time. And I'm excited to talk about everything that you've been doing because you guys have been busy bees doing a ton of stuff. Um, and really like stuff that's quite necessary in the Bitcoin space. Actually, like not a lot of people are sort of
Mm.
doing what you do and certainly not doing it as effectively. So, do
Oh,
you want to
wow.
just give a brief introduction of who you are and what you do, and then we can kind of get into your journey in the Bitcoin space and get into everything that you've been doing with your businesses?
Yeah, I'd be honored. Well, first, thanks for having me. It really is an honor to be here. So we actually have two core companies. One is Voss, which is a strategic innovation firm where we really empower ventures through thoughtful design and development, specifically in Web3. So there's a lot of adoption education that happens there, which is what I truly love. And that's kind of where our second company was born, 202ware, which is specifically built around empowering the next wave of adopters through education, which primarily right now is a magazine, like a print periodical. But we are under the hood pretty seriously building out some cross-functional apprenticeship programs to actually onboard people that are interested in
Mm.
going from maybe Web 2 to Web 3 development or Web 2 to Web 3 design. And that is really where I'm super passionate. But as you said, there's not a lot of people doing it in the space, which also means there's not a lot of money for it in the space, right? Which is kind of why we have two companies going at the same time.
Yeah. Can you talk about then, I guess, like who you are, what your background is, and like what you were doing prior to this? Like, what was your journey coming in? Because we didn't even introduce you. You're Billy
Yeah.
Rogers.
Oh, hi. Yeah. Also, I'm Billy Rogers. I didn't even say my name. I'm Billy Rogers. So that's a great question. My design journey, so my career as a designer started, what year is it? Back in 2015, so 10 years ago. I was always kind of dabbling in this executive assistant role through different companies. And I was also constantly pushing on their creative or lack of creative to get them to kind of amp up marketing or fix their collateral. And so through that, I almost always held dual roles where I was running, design as well as being an executive assistant because a lot of companies don't have internal design teams.
Mm,
And so that was really where I started to realize I have a deep passion for this, for making sure that a brand is aligned on all touch points, right? Like the whole experience feels very on brand. I absolutely love it. At the same time, I was also managing coffee shops. I was a, professional barista, kind of dual career person for back
wow.
since I was 18. So I don't even know how long that is at this point, 15 years or so. And I learned a lot through that as well, and just human interaction and how people perceive things and just that overall user experience that is so paramount to everything we do today, right? And it's kind of what we see broken in a lot of the Web3 universe is that user experience is still very janky.
Yes, we can definitely talk about that. Oh my God. Wait, hang
Yeah.
on a second. You had a full-time job as a barista and you were an executive assistant?
Yeah, there was a lot of times where I was doing both. Um,
My
and
God.
then there were some times where I was in between and I always fell back on being a barista. Maybe we were moving or there was quite a long period where we were moving to different states. And so it was always easier to get a job managing a coffee shop while I looked for a job as an EA. And then I would usually kind of just keep both because I love coffee. I love that. I call it single serving friendships where you're like really engaging with people, but it's so short and so sweet. And you really have the power to kind of transition their day into a better place. But it's, for no more than 5 minutes. And I just really love that.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow, that's really cool. That's incredible. You must have such a work ethic to do that as well. That's a lot of hours. Well, it's tiring and it's stressful. So do you have
Yeah.
formal design training or did that just happen organically
Yeah.
for you? You
Yeah,
do.
I do. So I actually started my design degree back in 2010. 10, 9, somewhere in there. And I realized during that time, I was doing communication design and graphic design wasn't as popular just yet. But I realized I'm going to be working on the computer all the time. I hate the computer. I don't want to do this. And so I stopped going after my degree, got married, ran away to Alaska with a military man, and was doing, why not? Was doing very hands-on design. Like I always loved charcoal paint. That was in my head, I imagined, why can't we just design a billboard, as a hands-on experience and then duplicate it? Why does it all have to be computer-based? Well, fast forward 10 years, I had all these roles where I was on the computer anyway, and I wasn't doing what I loved. And so I actually went back and finished my degree through Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, which is the sister school of SCAD, which is a very prestigious design school. And so I specified in graphic design there, and I just fell in love with it. They really focus on the user experience, which is what I think makes design impactful. And without that piece, it kind of always falls flat.
It's funny actually, because I've noticed that like in the kind of, I mean, I'm a Bitcoin maxi, as you know, but I've noticed that
What?
kind of in the like crypto space, there are a lot of women in the NFT space and now certainly in the Bitcoin space and the ordinal space. So it's like a thing. And women seem to be much more drawn to the aesthetics of things. And I often describe this to people where I'm like, men build the house and women make it look like a beautiful home. And it's a massive generalization, but I think it does kind of hold true a lot of the time. And what
I
I've
agree.
discovered in the Bitcoin ecosystem is that, there are all these apps that have been built, there's a gazillion wallets. I don't know why, but for some reason, people always think they can make a better wallet than the last one. And they all share one common problem that they functionally work. But the
Hmm.
design and like the lack of the user experience is just really poor. They're not intuitive, like they're not easy
Hmm.
to use. Some of the basic things that I would expect to have are just not available. Like, for example, I don't know, everybody does their tax returns for their holdings in a wallet. Why isn't there a button where I can PDF stuff in the
Yeah.
currency that I need it and forward it somewhere? Like for it. I mean, that's just like to me such an obvious thing that's missing. And I
Yeah.
see this all over the place where these things get built and people are like, oh, this is an amazing technology. And I don't mean to shit on men, but it's like some dude puts out a white paper and is like, look at this amazing thing.
Oh
And
gosh.
it's just kind of like, oh, yeah, okay, you've kind of built, I don't know, you've built like a bridge, but with no beautiful plants on it or benches that anyone can sit on. So it's functionally going over the river, but it's not an experience. It's just it gets you from A to B, but it's not terribly pleasant. And the bridge is probably made of concrete and covered in graffiti. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like we're in this cycle now, whereas more women come into this space, that actually that user experience might improve and things might be much more delightful to use as opposed to just being functional. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
your kind of experience.
No, I mean, I totally agree. And I think, it almost goes a little deeper, maybe higher, who knows? But, the industry is heavily run by developers right now, and good development is driven by great design. And there are not a lot of designers in the space, or clearly there are designers somewhere in it, but there's not a lot of designers who I would say fully understand the user experience from Web 2 native people, right? Like people that aren't gamers, people that didn't like spend the last 10 years in this industry, don't know the terminology, they're not looking at it from that perspective. And so
Yeah.
everything feels like it's just kind of built by a developer. And you're like, I don't know what's happening. I mean, even and it sounds like you struggle too, right? I get into these wallets, I'm very familiar with the industry, and I still struggle to like purchase more assets. Some of that is the bank is constantly blocking my card, but some of it is like, what, like, what buttons do I press? And why does this feel a little bit like I shouldn't be doing it? It has this undertone of like, you maybe shouldn't push purchase. It might
Mm,
not end up in your wallet, like, I don't know.
yeah.
It just doesn't feel safe. And I think to your point, like women inherently bring this like value of safety, right? When we are in a home, when we are mothers, when we are running a workplace, I think we just inherently have this sense of safety we bring with us a little bit more prominently than maybe men do. And that's not to
Yeah.
say men can't feel safe. I think it's just the way we look at things.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you looked at the car analogy, it's like a man would look at the engine and, like the traction and that kind of stuff. And a woman would be like, what's the interior like? Does it have a nice sound
Hmm.
system? Is there a cup holder? You know, like,
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy.
and if it doesn't have those things, it's like, I don't care if it goes slightly, it has more, power. Sorry, my dog's having a dream. I don't know if you can hear.
Yeah, I love when they do that.
You chasing a rabbit?
So cute.
It's so funny. I often wonder what they dream about actually. When the paws go, they're like
Yeah, I always think it's what you're saying, chasing a rabbit or another dog.
the important stuff in life. Yeah, so that's interesting. So then tell me about your journey in kind of getting into this particular technology. I know you do look at sort of Web3 more broadly, but when did you actually
Yeah.
discover it? Like what was that process like?
So my husband's been in and around the industry since Bitcoin's inception. So back in what, 2009. And we haven't been together that long. We got together in 2014, but he is what I would call a deep
Oh,
tech.
so he was already a Bitcoiner with when you met him. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but he never really brought it up directly, right? So he's like a deep tech nerd, for lack of a better word. He's very knowledgeable in all types of communication systems. And so he describes Bitcoin as a virus, which I think is fascinating, because the way it catches on, but that's beside the point. He's constantly been telling me about, you need to get into development, you need to look at Web3 and Bitcoin. And I, for probably a few years, I was like, please stop talking all this nerd stuff to me. I just can't. That's like, I don't even know what the words coming out of your mouth right now are. Like, they are so far beyond my understanding. I'm gonna like kind of live in my own little world. Well, when I finished my graphic design degree, I was looking for, any type of experience. And he had applied me to a job at a tech company. It wasn't a Web3 company, but it was a tech company because he wanted to, I think, get me into tech. And I did not know that at the time. So I get this email for an interview with this company. I have no idea that I applied to. And I get on the interview, goes great, end up getting the job. And my husband's like, yeah, I applied you to that job. I'm like, okay. So through that job, though, I really fell in love again with the user experience on the technical side, like building dashboards, making things feel intuitive. Like it just really loved it. And I was also doing a lot of UX interviews. So interviewing all of our clients and figuring out what worked, what didn't work. And so it's like that whole circle of life, I really loved. So fast forward past that job, we start our own firm. I'm still not sold on Web3 at this point. And so he takes me to a meetup, like just go, just listen. I'm like, all right, gross. I will go. So I go, and it's about Bitcoin mining and the energy grid. And that is the moment I fell in love, which still shocks me to this day because it's so far outside of, I guess, where I expected to fall in love, which was more on like the East Denver creative side, right? Like that kind of whole group. But I really fell in love with Bitcoin mining, the energy grid, and just the future of really Bitcoin and how it affects the whole globe.
Hmm.
And I haven't looked back. I mean, since that meetup, I was like, why haven't you told me about this? Like, yeah, I'm not even going to answer that question. And
That's
it's,
so
yeah,
funny. So is that what kind of brought you into the Texas Blockchain Council then? Was it that
yeah,
interest in the mining in? Oh, that's really
yeah,
fascinating, huh?
it is. It is. I mean, I really enjoyed learning about the energy grid too, which again shocks me. But I had no idea how the grid system works specifically here in Texas. And the more I learn about that and the way Bitcoin miners really enhance the power of the grid, which is counter to all the media that's out there, I
Mm,
just almost felt this sense of like justice isn't being served to this industry. And it was like so clear to me, as I think most of us, right? Once it clicks, it just clicks. It almost doesn't even matter how it clicks. It's just like instantly everything is clear. And I can see why media doesn't want people to know about this, understand it, or believe in it, because while all this legislation is happening under the hood, the mass majority doesn't care, doesn't want anything to do with it. And so by the time they become aware of what's happening, legislation will already be established and it will be too late for them to have any say. And there's this piece of me that just wants everyone to be educated, but in a way that feels native to them. Like I don't want to be
Mhm.
shoving information down their throat, like come to the Bitcoin side. I really want them to see it from whichever angle sparks a fire in them, because I think we're advocating for the future of, you know, far beyond even our grandkids.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, definitely. Um, So, just to kind of talk about the education piece, because you said that you're doing it primarily through a print magazine, and I just thought that that was
Hmm.
so interesting that you guys were doing that because it runs so contrary to everything that everybody else is doing. So, it's all about like the podcast, the e-newsletter, the this, the that. And I was really
Yeah,
fascinated about that background. I think you told me about it, must be about a year ago now or something. You were talking about putting that together, maybe more. But it's
yeah.
really fascinating that you made that choice. What drove that in a Web3 context?
There's a there were a couple driving things behind the decision. The first, selfishly, I always wanted to work at a magazine and it just never was in my path. And so I said, well, I'll just make my own magazine, not knowing at the time how intense that would be trying to put it together with me, just me, or even a small team that we have now. um, but the other thing was when we look at the next wave of adopters, right? These are not your tech forward people that we want to come over and start to use this technology. And so those people interact a lot still with print, right? These are your people that want to get the flyer outside of the house that has the printout and the price, or they still get magazines, or they read their mail. These are very tactile individuals. And so looking at that user experience side, it's okay, how does the next wave of adopters interact currently with the internet? Pretty limited, right?
Mm.
They're still in a print world. And so that speaks to them. And it's been fascinating to watch, 6-year-olds all the way up to 75-year-olds interact with the magazine and feel like they could just keep flipping through it and through it. And even with digital magazines, it's not an experience we have, right? Like we interact with print very differently than we do with any online media.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very true. And so, what content do you put in that magazine? Like, how do you design it and how do you put it together in such a way that it's sort of a pleasurable read, but it's also like dropping in educational stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it's very design driven. We usually have a featured artist. In one issue, we had a featured community, but I planned them out very broadly at first, right? Like I think last year we had the coin issue, so it was like kind of answering what is crypto. We had the block issue, which just was answering like what is blockchain. So we're starting at this very base level of knowledge. We had the neon issue, which was around like why do Web3 companies use so much neon? Uh,
Okay, we'll have to
and
come back to that. Why do they?
and it's just I know people won't really be able to see, but we really do try to design like this is a glossary of terms for
Oh, it's gorgeous. I
crypto.
love it. I love
So it's
it.
meant to be engaging, right? Like just like when you pick up a magazine at a newsstand, you usually flip through it, and if you see something that like really just entices you, you buy it. So it's
Hmm.
meant to feel that way, right? Like most people are going to flip through this and be like, "Oh, wait a minute, this is actually pretty interesting looking," and then they start to read it, right? Because they're visually interested and they're looking now at a glossary of terms for crypto, like what is a bull market? What is a shit coin? What does hodl mean, right? And they're learning these things at a very low level. And then they start to become more interested just naturally. And I think that's the beauty of something that they can continually revisit, right? Or leave on
Hmm.
the coffee table and now someone else in their family is looking at it.
And where do you distribute that? Like, if somebody wanted to have it, can they subscribe to it and have it delivered to their door, or do they need to find it at an event? Like, where does that actually get pushed out in hard
All of the
copy?
above. Yeah, we do have a subscription on our website. Actually, we're switching our website right now. So the subscription function is not live, but it is available
Send me the link
to
then, because
order.
I'll put it
Okay.
in when I put the podcast out. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, you can purchase them online. We have a small student demographic of just over 2,000 that we distribute it to at no
Hmm.
charge. And then we distributed at the North American Blockchain Summit last fall. It was in all the bags.
That's
So
right.
we
I
kind of
remember that. I remember because I think you'd posted about it. Yeah.
probably, yeah.
I think you'd done their artwork. Was that right for the event?
Yeah, we did all the design for the North American Blockchain Summit last year. all the on-site signage, on-screen signage. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was really cool. So then what kind of comes next then? So you set up this business that is essentially looking at Web3 stuff. You've got your magazine being published out. You've got involved with the Texas Blockchain Council and then by extension the North American Blockchain Summit, which are obviously
Hmm.
tangential, or same people really, but broader reach, I
Yeah.
guess. But where do you see this going then? Like, what's your kind of objective in terms of you obviously want to educate newbies, but are you looking for more clients in the Web3 space to do the design stuff for them, or like just doing stuff that would bring newbies into this space? Like, what's the kind of object or strategy, I guess,
Yeah,
if
that's
you're at liberty to share it?
Oh, for sure. The strategy is always shifting because, we're essentially a startup. We are doing a lot of work with councils, not just the Texas Blockchain Councils, to kind of help them refresh their brand and their web presences the way the way I view it, without someone lobbying for positive legislation, there is no future in the industry. So I really love working with councils. We just launched the North American Blockchain Association, which was the group where several councils, I think they have 8 right now, all come together so they can work as community of states up to the federal, which is fascinating. We love working with clients who are interested in adopting this technology. So I'm always happy to consult and or build projects around people that want to maybe integrate how do they accept Bitcoin payments, right, at their venue, or how do they have, for example, there's an entertainment venue we've been working with. They want to integrate, how do they do on-chain gaming? How do they do tokens? Like, how do they do all these things in a way that feels not just like they're doing it to do it, but of real value to their user base? And then, of course, my heart, I would always love to work with established Web3 brands like Kraken or any of those that are looking to refresh in any fashion. Not to say Kraken needs to. Their wallet's probably one of my more favored wallets, but
Really?
um, yeah, I would say it
Why
is.
is that?
I felt like the onboarding of the wallet when I opened it, like to start it, was a lot more straightforward than some of the other ones. And I think that that's important. I mean, it's still confusing, right? The seed phrase, all of these things you have to notate to someone who doesn't know the industry. But I felt like it was a little bit more of an enjoyable experience on setup, which
Mm,
stuck with me.
yeah, I mean that's so important. I mean, if you have like a bad user experience, then people just drop off. Like the barrier
Yeah.
to getting access to what you want to get access to becomes too high, and people just can't be bothered to spend the time. And understandably so. I mean, I just find it wild. It's just wild to me how many people make these things. They're like, look at this great piece of tech. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. But it's like really awkward and a pain in the ass to use. I think this is actually one of the reasons why Nostr, like the chat system Nostr, doesn't have wide adoption. I tend
Hmm.
to use primal.net mostly as an interface for it. But even that, it's like you have to set up your Get Albi account, store your public and private keys so that you can sign into it without having to always go and do it manually. That presents a security risk because now that browser extension's got access to all your stuff on your browser, and then
Yeah.
it's like you go into it and then it's very buggy. It's like you're trying to post stuff and for no apparent reason, suddenly like the post just won't send. Um,
Mm.
and I use a Brave browser primarily, and it shows you like all the trackers and cookies. And oh my God, like primal.net, insane. And one day it was getting really glitchy, and I was like, I wonder why that is. And then I look up at the tracker button, and I was like, oh my God, like there's literally like one after the other. And I thought, this is crazy.
That is
Um,
crazy.
yeah, especially for, a company operating in the Nostr space. So
Hmm.
all of these things are quite buggy. And then you go on to Nostr, and all you get is a load of people on Nostr raging about the fact that nobody's using Nostr. And I'm like, this isn't really a great experience. Like, if you want people to come onto the platform, then you should just post content here and they'll come. But if they
Yeah.
come on here and all they're getting is a lecture about why they should be using Nostr, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's funny. I actually downloaded Nostr not long after you and I met because I had been listening to you talk and you bring it up quite a bit. And so I was like, I got to check this out. And I had a very similar experience to your thing. I got on and I was like, this is a strange cadence of posting. Like what's coming out is odd. And I just felt kind of like, I don't think I understand the point of this app yet. which is true for almost any social app when it first starts. Kind of like,
Kind of as it finds its feet. But for example, like, I mean,
yeah,
I think that Elon Musk is quite unethical. And I think X is just basically a data mining machine for Grok now. Like they're
oh,
just training their AI. And I've
sure.
kind of got to the point where I'm like, I post about Nostra. I used to a fair bit there, and you get immediately throttled. And I'm just like, do you
Mm,
know what? If you're going to charge me however much it is per month for a blue check, then
hmm.
I'm signing a service contract with you and I have an expectation that I have a certain level of service. If you're then going to throttle me on your allegedly free speech platform because I post about Substack or Noster, two things which you see as competitors, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not a free speech platform and you're charging me for a service that I'm not receiving, because the thing with the blue check is like, oh, your replies will get more visibility. This
Yeah,
and it's like, well, okay, but if I'm paying it and then you're throttling me, I'm not getting that. So I've
so
cancelled my
true.
blue check now. Because I was just like, but I do look at it for news because it's the place where you get now the most
Yeah.
real-time updates. But it was interesting because I was talking to somebody about Nostra and saying I don't really post often enough and I don't look at it often enough. But I explained to them the reason why. I said, look, I am posting on several platforms in one go, and I use schedulers like Hootsuite and Publer and
Hmm.
stuff like that. And Noster doesn't have that ability to do that. So if I have to push content out to four different platforms and I can do it on a scheduler, and then there's a fifth one that requires me to manually do an upload, I'm very likely not going to have the time to do it because I schedule stuff like weeks in
Yeah.
advance and then it just so I'm not going to on the day be like, oh, shoot, I posted that thing on LinkedIn. Let me just go back to Nostr and copy it. It's just not
Yeah,
going to
no.
happen. So to your point about the user experience and adoption, it's like, well, if you want people to use that platform, you need to understand how people are actually using social media. So, have you actually gone and talked to anyone? And I would hazard a guess the answer is probably no or not much. Or they've
Yeah.
gone and talked to a load of Bitcoiners who are like, well, I need this like lightning payment thing. And I'm like, well, if you're trying to grow a network, you need interesting content. You need to
Yeah.
make it easy for people to post content. And the way that most people in marketing do that is they do it via a scheduler. They don't
Yeah.
sit there and post in real time. So if you
No.
don't provide an ability for somebody to have an API to upload stuff, they ain't going to do it in the like critical mass that you need. So yeah.
Yeah. It is this kind of like hairy in between zone, right? Like how do we be decentralized where it matters? But obviously we need some form of centralization. And how do we make sure those two things don't cross so that there actually is a piece of decentralization that stays as such, right? And that's I think where a lot of places are trying to navigate. And it is hairy and it's hard and it's confusing, if we're honest.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know because I think an interface could just build an API. I think. I mean, again,
Yeah.
I'm not technical, but I'm like, sure, the protocol is decentralized, but the interface is not. And I mean, I guess it's like I
Hmm.
can automate emails from,
Yeah.
I don't know, like say Google, schedule them. I don't need SMT protocol to be on board with that. Google just provides me with an interface that does it. So
Yeah.
why can't say Primal.net allow you to connect a scheduler up so that you can then easily just cross post your content without having to do it everywhere else? So yeah, I
I
don't
think
know.
I think they could. I just think it sounds like there's some core beliefs in there that they don't want to be mixed in with, you know, anybody else, or maybe even provide an API for connection because to them that kind of goes against being siloed and decentralized.
Yeah, I
There's no saying.
suppose. But I
There's no
mean,
telling.
what's the difference to them if I post it manually or if I post it via API, right? Like,
I mean, I don't think it should matter.
yeah, maybe I'll just get somebody to write me my own API or my own automation. It's got to be
Yeah,
possible. And be like, hey, can you just do this?
anything's possible.
Any tech people out there, founders listening out there, like build an API, please,
Mhm.
for Nostr.
Yeah, yeah. No, maybe Hootsuite will pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, they're so behind the curve, all those
They are.
platforms. It's like even just like basic stuff. I mean, they'll only do the things that seem really, well, I guess they go by volume numbers, which is fair. They're like,
Yeah,
if we're going to spend dev resources, we'll do it where we actually get some bang for our buck right now. Yeah,
that's
don't
fair.
know, don't know. So tell me, what's next then, like on the horizon? So you've got yourself quite well established now with all of your graphic design stuff. You're doing interesting projects for all these councils. Um, what next on the horizon?
Well, I would say for Voss Allen, we're in this growth phase, right? Where it is kind of establishing strategy. Like who do we want to work with moving forward? And does it align with everything we want to be doing? All of our clients right now are in pure alignment with us, which is awesome. But yeah, how do we grow that to your point? And then on the 202 wear side, it's establishing and finalizing that apprenticeship program, which is like kind of in the middle. So we're in this place right now where we're creating basically user interviews where we want to sit with Web3 companies and really understand what are the roles they're trying to fill, what are they paying for those roles, are they even open to hiring onshore because a lot of these companies use offshore resources. Part of that is because unfortunately a lot of offshore resources have a little bit more knowledge in developing on chain. The other is they're more cost effective, and so we're in this odd place where just as a nation, a lot of companies, I don't know if they could be profitable if they hired onshore. And so we want to make sure that as we build out this apprenticeship program, we aren't enticing a lot of people to come to an industry that maybe doesn't want to hire onshore, can't afford to hire onshore. And so we're in this kind of discovery phase where we really need to sit with Web3 companies and understand what are they looking for and how do we build something that feeds into them.
So you're essentially looking to be like a funnel for them for, is it for graphic design artists specifically in this
I would
space?
say it's more product design and
Okay.
development. So the apprenticeship program will be built where there are UX UI designers going through with front end and back end developers. So they can go through as a team and actually operate cross functionally like you do in the real world. But yeah, I think where I get stuck and where I think it's really important to host interviews and again, just do research is are they open to staffing on shore? That's my biggest question.
Why do you think that there isn't the expertise in the US? Like, is that based on what you've seen, or are you making an assumption, or is it actually like, is this like a data-driven thing where you just see that people don't have the skill sets that are needed?
I mean, I can say from our experience in working on blockchain projects, we have hired offshore quite a few times because they just have more expertise currently in that industry. And I don't know if it's based around, again, they're more cost effective, so they get more work, which means they get more experience, you
Mm.
know, or if we just have a lot of Web 2 devs, and to go from Web 2 to Web 3 is a whole nother training program. And there are quite a few great ones out there. That transition developers. But we are actually in a mentor in one of those programs, and one of the feedback things is they can't necessarily always get jobs in Web3. It's still a pretty small industry at its core, and so
So they feel like they're going through the training program, and then at the end of it, there's no guarantee of a role.
yeah, and
Right.
I don't know if that's necessarily. I think for some of them it's quality of work, just to be
Hmm.
blunt. Um, and the other is, it's a small industry, and a lot of companies don't have time or maybe even the internal resources and staff to train a junior Web3 dev when they can hire offshore and they've got the full stack team.
Hmm. That's interesting because I don't know. My experience with some of this offshore stuff is like people have the qualifications on paper, but actually, when you try and work with them, it's quite difficult.
And that is true too. There is a lot of, mm, how do I put this? It takes a while to find the right offshore team that actually has the skills that they say they do.
Mm.
And that's unfortunate too, right? I always lean back on this unwritten blog post that I have. It's the real cost of hiring offshore. It you usually have to hire two or three times or redo the project because it wasn't done correctly. And so, from my point of view, I think it's always better to hire and train onshore talent because it's just closer to home. It's a better investment, X, Y, and
Mm.
Z. But when you are hiring offshore, there is a lot of unknown, especially if you're not going through a referral where someone else has already used them. Uh, you generally do have to do it a few times, which ends up costing what it would cost to hire onshore. But perceptually, from the board's point of view, they may not see it that way.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem, isn't it? If you have to redo it, then actually it's a false economy to say that you're saving money. And I think oftentimes just having somebody local that, is either physically close to you or culturally
Yeah.
close to you or time zone close to you is much easier because you
Yeah.
can then, work with them, kind of on a much more day-to-day, like high touch basis. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%, 100% I agree with you. What's the spread do you find generally of like women versus men in this space? So like when you look at how many people are coming into this space that are taking interest in it, do you see more women in the space or is it predominantly men?
I'd say it's still predominantly men. Just
Really?
thinking back on the apprenticeship program where we were mentors, there were three women and probably 20 or more men.
Oh gosh.
So I was surprised there were even women in there, I will say. It was awesome. And they all chose to be on my team because I was the only woman mentor, which was really exciting. But yeah, I mean, what is that spread? It's like less than 5% women.
Wow.
And I don't know that that'll change anytime soon because I don't know. I mean, you've probably been to some meetups for sure. It's a sausage party sometimes, and it doesn't feel it doesn't feel safe or comfortable or all those things we spoke about in the beginning that people are looking for when they're trying to learn and enter a new industry. It feels a little bit male dominated and not in the best way. So I think it'll sadly be a minute until more women feel comfortable enough to even be interested.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because I feel like on the education piece, what I tend to see with women who are not already in the Bitcoin space, they're really just interested, back to your earlier point about the wallets, they're really just interested about like, just tell me what I need to know. I want to do it.
Hmm.
And then I actually don't want to have to think about it ever again. And I think there are some of us that get very deep ingrained in this space and we get very passionate about it. But I actually don't
Yeah,
think that that is the norm. I think it's
yeah,
quite the exception. And I think a lot of that probably has to do as well with like, I score very high on disagreeableness and very high on openness. And that's very typical for people in the innovation space and like
mm,
tech and stuff like that. And I'm guessing you probably do too to some extent. Maybe not disagreeableness, but disagreeableness really just means you don't have a problem with going against the grain, basically.
yeah,
You're not kind of
yeah,
worried if like the rest of society doesn't have interest or want to follow what you want to do.
yeah.
And men generally tend to score more high on disagreeable. So I think for them, they're
Interesting.
more technical and they're usually more disagreeable. So they're more interested in or more open to doing things that aren't necessarily accepted societally or broadly adopted. And so, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I gave a talk at the University of Calgary recently. They were doing an Islamic coin exhibition. The talk was called Why Bitcoin is Halal, like Islamic finance in the
Mm,
digital age. But it's
interesting.
interesting because the lady that hosts the talk, she's had me back like three times to do these talks. And she said, "Oh, I'm finally getting it. I'm actually starting to understand it now. It's kind of I'm absorbing it." And she's like, "It's
That's
not even
awesome.
that I'm learning something new. I'm just kind of like it's starting to all kind of fit in." And I think that you have to hear about this stuff in many different contexts and understand its applicability before the
Yeah.
penny really drops. I mean, I knew about Bitcoin in 2011, and my response to it was like, "That sounds really boring," because I didn't because I didn't understand what the impact was of having decentralized money that wasn't controlled by a central bank. And I worked in
Yeah.
finance, so it's
Yeah.
not even like I didn't have industry knowledge. I just didn't get why that would be a problem. Like, of course we would have a central bank. Why wouldn't we? Who's going to issue the currency? Why does this
Yeah.
even matter? Like, you don't understand that stuff if it's not really, if there isn't a story around it that you can really relate to.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's some of it with women as well. They've got so much going on in their lives. They're often working now, as well as being mothers, as well as managing a household, and they understand the benefit of having sound money and not having their wealth be debased. But they
Hmm.
don't want to spend 1,000 hours listening to Safety Amos go on about like, the depths of like Austrian economics. They're just like, how do I open a wallet? How do I go and
Hmm.
buy the stuff? How do I put it in the wallet? How do I store it safely? The end,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that what came up while you were speaking was there's actually kind of two pieces to women entering the industry, right? One is exactly what you're saying, just getting them interested in interacting with Bitcoin and having a wallet and these kind of like base level things, which I think is where the magazine lives, right? It's like just getting people interested. But then there's the second part where it's like, how do we get women working in the industry? And that's
Mm,
always going to be, I think, a slightly smaller number than getting women just interacting in the industry. And that's where the apprenticeship program comes in, is for those that are interested in taking that next step. And I honestly think the product design piece is really what's most needed
I
right
agree.
now.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. There was actually an investor said that it was, I'm not going to name who it was, but she said to me that like she thinks the reason that all the design and all of the various different Bitcoin products is so bad is because we don't have enough women doing it.
I mean, I agree.
She
I
was actually the one that
agree.
planted the thought in my head, and then when I sort of turned it around, I was like, she's right. That's 100% why.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's hard. It feels weird to say move out of the way, men, right? But we need to work in tandem, right? Men have a lot of the technical expertise, maybe some of the women don't, but the women have the more tactile user experience knowledge that I think they need. And I would say the design industry is probably more heavily female. There are obviously males in it, but it's that balance, right? Of like, we need to marry design to development. It's almost like not even male and female. It's like, how do we marry design and development? And those things inherently have characteristics that lean more one way or the other, but they're not married at the moment in a way that
And I
feels
think to your
approachable.
earlier point as well is like actually good products start with a good design, the user requirements, a good design, and
Hmm.
then the product gets developed. I feel like in the Bitcoin industry, what happens is the product gets developed, there's a user need, the product gets developed, and there's no design that happens in it, and then everything gets fudged after it's out the door, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if you think about Apple as a case in point, I mean, I know Apple's a bit shitty these days and they haven't really done much of anything, but in the Steve Jobs era, everything was
Hmm.
about user experience.
Hmm.
Everything. Like that was absolutely the crux of everything that got done. It was like, it's, does this look pretty? You know, does this work
Yeah,
well? I bought a new laptop the other day and I had to get a Mac because it was too awkward to change everything
yeah.
over and all the different systems. But I had this beautiful, like rose gold MacBook Air. Well, they don't do it now. It comes in
I know what
like
you're talking about.
grey. Yeah, it comes in grey, a bit more grey, and then black. Like
Yeah, I know.
that was literally the color spread. And I looked at it and I thought, wow, this company's really gone down the pan. Like there is no
I
panache in walking around with a grey laptop. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I
I'm not going to be
agree.
sat at the airport, you know, on my grey laptop going, look at my beautiful grey laptop. No, I'm
I
just
feel you.
gonna.
I actually just bought a new one as well because it was just time, and I felt the exact same way. I was like, this color palette option is so boring. And there was this sense of luxury, I think, that came with being able to pick a color that felt aligned with kind of your expression of yourself, but also was very beautifully done.
Mhm.
Whereas now that's kind of stripped away and it's back to just the basic color
Yeah,
palette, which I agree is
what we
not.
would call fiat design.
Yeah, actually, I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, you know what? I think when you were talking about the wallets and starting with development, it has this memory that I joke about sometimes when I'm talking to my husband about walking clients through a project. But it's when you're learning design, they have you do this paper prototyping piece. And it's basically taking like your app design, cutting it out in paper, and having someone walk through it because paper is very low cost, right? Like if they're like, I can't find the button of when you're asking me to log in, it's just on paper. You didn't spend any time developing it. And it seems like they almost could go all the way back there, right? Like they're skipping that prototyping phase where they're asking people to walk through maybe 5 different steps and seeing if they can do it without any assistance.
Yeah. I also think it's not a funding issue because, I mean, for example, like the worst interface I think I've ever used in my life is Facebook. Like
Mm.
they bought Instagram, they did a really crappy integration. Now they've got 5 different places where you go and do the same thing. None of the
Mm-hmm.
instructions are clear. None of the help desk pages are updated. And I look at it and I'm like, that company has so much funding, employs thousands of people who I'm sure have had a ton of training and a grueling interview process. And at the end of it, they've produced something which, like, it couldn't be that shitty if you tried. You know, it's so bad. It's just so bad.
Yeah.
And I kind of look at it and I'm like, nobody sat down and said, okay, if we're gonna, you know, we're gonna buy Instagram because we're worried that they're gonna eat our lunch. So we need to buy the company because they're a threat to us. And I'm
Yeah.
like a bit like, okay, fine, but you actually could have integrated the features that made Instagram cool into Facebook without having to buy the company. And now you've got these two things running in tandem and they're both crap. You know,
Yeah.
like Instagram is nowhere near as cool as it was because it used to be a really nice, simple app that just had images. It was super clear. Now it's
Hmm.
just like littered with all these unnecessary features. I can put squiggle, add music, oh, invite people to co-share with you. I'm like, God, this is just no.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up those two apps. I actually deleted both of them probably a year ago now because I was just getting so frustrated with the whole experience. And I was like, you know what? I don't need this in my life. And so I deleted them.
I actually don't open them. I literally just post on a schedule for them. And if I'm doing marketing work for
Mm.
clients like separate, all I do is I just go on, I scroll, I like things, like share, whatever, and I just do it. But I do it's literally like I'm doing this, while I'm listening to a podcast or something, and it's like mindless, but I'm not doing it because I'm engaging. The content is
Mm-mm.
engaging. And I
Yeah,
think to be honest, their user base is probably dropping off. I mean, I don't know.
I would
Um,
assume so.
yeah, and the same actually with X. It's interesting because the way that they've geared their algorithm is I just see now this like tiny limited number of people whose posts I
Hmm.
might have engaged with, and it gets narrower and narrower and narrower on that for
Yeah,
you column because the way that they've calibrated it is so if you engage with something, you see more of it. And so all of the people that I actually follow, I don't see half of what they do. And I've started going on to like searching for people that I follow in like intentionally and going, oh my God, they've done like
yeah,
20 posts in the last week and I didn't see a single one of them. And again, it's that thing of like, what are you trying to design here? Like, if I follow somebody, it's because I like their stuff and I want to see
yeah,
more of it. And the fact that I didn't click on something because maybe I didn't log in for 3 days and there was a big news story going on. And so I got really interested in that. It doesn't mean that I suddenly don't want to see that person's posts. So
yeah.
I
It's
don't know.
interesting you bring that up. I was just looking at X a few days ago, thinking the exact same thing. Like I was
Mm,
scrolling, I was like, this is like the same six people just
yeah.
continually. And how did I get trapped here? And how do I get out of here? Also, do I care to spend the time figuring that out? No, I don't. And so I just go there, like you're saying, to check my notifications and move on with my life because it's not intuitively giving me what I asked it to give me. And so
Yeah.
I'm not going to like try to figure out the back end code or how to rewrite its algorithm or override its algorithm to give me something different. But I think a lot of these companies have fired or laid off, developers and tried to replace them with AI, which I think most of us who are really into Bitcoin and the technology kind of roll our eyes at AI because it's just the popular stepbrother. And it feels that way when you're in the app now, right? It feels like there's no one back there making sure it's working how it should be. It's just being run by a computer that no one really checks on.
That's so true. I mean, it's funny because all the hype around AI, and I think AI is great, but I think it's great in the same way that
It
I
has
think an
its
Excel
place.
spreadsheet is great. Like, well, you like I use it if I'm writing an article. I write the article and then I'll go in and I'll be like, can you please improve on any of the grammar that I've like, done? So, if I've
Yeah.
put sometimes when you're free flowing with thoughts, it's like, oh, it just kind of comes out a bit garbled. And so I'm like,
Hmm.
improve it. And then I go through and check it. And then I put all of the references in and highlights and the links and like do the images and things like that. It's great for images. Like I love that I can write an article
It
and
is
I can
fun.
produce an image that is for the article. I mean, that's like, for somebody who's not an artist or doesn't have the time to sit there and draw something from scratch, like I'm sure you'd probably do a much better job than the AI. But it's a really
It's
great,
still
like
fun.
quick, yeah.
Mhm.
So you can kind of represent things for other people that you're visualizing. I mean, stuff like that is great, but
It is.
I find it somewhat amusing the way that people view it because I'm like, this is just an efficiency tool. It's a way of searching
Hmm.
for stuff. And then you get this issue. Oh, sorry, this is like my pet peeve. But how they layer the AI with their ideologies. And I'm like, okay, this is a search engine and it is a summary thing. And when I
Hmm.
put a question in there, I want to just get the information I need and I want you to format it in the way that I've asked. I'm not asking for your opinion, AI programmer, as to what you think about this particular issue. So, for example, I'd uploaded an article in it and I wanted to do a social media post about it. And I was like, I've obviously read the article, which is why I want to post it. So I'm like, write me a very short summary in one paragraph of this article, blah, 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 do this, do that. And it spits it out. And it had completely changed the meaning of the article, the position that the article was taking. It was about
Mm.
environmental stuff and like climate change. it
Okay.
didn't like what the author had written. And so it just flipped the thing around, basically saying climate change is real, we're all going to die or whatever. And I was like, okay, you're now actually not functional because I didn't ask for your
Hmm.
opinion. I just asked you to do a summary. So now you're not working. So I'm paying, I think this was on ChatGPT. So I'm paying like what,
Yeah.
$20 a month for something that doesn't work now.
Yeah. It's
I mean, it's just so
fascinating.
crazy, right? And again, a
Uh-huh.
company that's like a ton of money behind it. And I'm like, okay, like self-sovereign AIs are proliferating. Very functional ones are going to be available soon. And the
Hmm.
second they are, nobody is going to use this shit because they're going to want to upload their own data and have the AI do the analysis that they want based on the specific instructions they've given and not this kind of
Yeah,
ideological mishmash. I mean,
I know. Well, what's interesting is I think there's those of us who have the awareness to question what comes back, right? Because it's not perfect and we know that. But then there's the other demographic who believes it to be a source of truth because that's how it's marketed to some degree. And they don't question what comes back. And so it's this very odd thing that I think some people will just always rely on as, their source of truth, no matter what it says. And that's a little bit odd, I think.
I tell you what it's great for is like instruction manuals. It's like if you're
Oh,
using a
yeah.
piece of software and you're like, oh, where's this setting? How do I do this? Instead of having to go onto the website, go to their help pages, trawl their
Yep.
help pages, you're just like, hey, I'm trying to do this on this app. How does that work? And then it will just give you all
Yeah.
these options. Oh, I just tried that, but that doesn't work. I see this. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Game changer. It's great for that.
I agree. I agree. And like what you're saying, right? Like I love writing things and then be like, hey, I probably don't have the best grammar. Like, can you fix that up for me? And it does. And sometimes it nails it. Other times it does not. It feels like there's some different people behind the wheel at different times, which is odd. But yeah, it's definitely productivity wise amazing. But I think people are just, we've been waiting on AI. We've been watching AI movies about different forms of AI for decades, so it feels, I think, like this tangible thing that we've all become kind of used to or
Mm.
expecting. Whereas when you talk about like Bitcoin and a decentralized database, we're like, what? What do you mean? There's nothing to relate it to.
Yeah, I mean, there is the argument that, you email, but you don't know how SNTP works necessarily.
I love that argument. Yeah.
And that's never been a barrier to entry. So I think when people say Bitcoin's too technical, that's not the issue. I think
Hmm.
going back to our original point, it's like the products are badly designed and they're difficult to use, which requires you to be more technical than you should be,
Yeah.
or than you should need to be. Um,
Yeah.
and that's what puts people off.
Yeah. I
So
would agree
Billy's
with
going to
you.
change the world with her apprentice program. That's what we're expecting.
I
We're
hope so.
relying on you.
I hope so. Yeah. We need to change the world of Web3 with better product design, and I hope to be a big part of that.
So 100%. So I'm just conscious of the time, but I'm like, can
Yeah.
you, if somebody wants to join the program, can you tell me like what the enrollment process is, how they find it, what you're looking for, how long the program is, like what are the actual, if somebody's like, hey, actually, I'm a Web3 person, designer, or I'm just
Yeah.
an amazing designer, I could really break into this market, how would they join your program?
Well, it's not launched yet. We are still kind of in that discovery phase where we want to interview Web3 companies. I do need to put a waiting list together, which brings up a great point. Thank you for
Yes.
saying that. I will make one and send you a link. Um, but it overall, I think the overall design of it is there will be an application process that really is almost just more around logic testing. Like when you go to a development boot camp, even if you know no code, they do some very basic logic testing to make sure that you do have kind of the understanding or ability to work through problems that's going to be necessary. And so there'll be kind of like a very baseline logic test. Then there'll be some onboarding sessions, but it's really meant to be a 30 to 45-day intensive program that's full time and paid, right? I think it's really important that from my perspective, apprenticeships can be paid if possible, because people want to, one, not feel like they're just doing stuff for free, but two, valued. And I think having that slight monetary benefit makes it feel like a valuable thing for them as well. Not that they're only learning, but they're also getting paid for their time. And then the way we're structuring it is at the end there will be kind of like a pool where Web3 companies have access to all of these individuals who just went through the program building real world products. But yeah, let me
That's
put together a wait list and send you that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that'd be a great idea. What level of experience are you looking for? I mean, are you talking about people that are completely new to everything?
No, not currently. This would be a Web 2 to Web 3 transition. So they would need to
Okay.
have um, maybe coding's not their day-to-day job, but they code on the side for fun. They need to have some basic understanding of code already, like JavaScript, TypeScript. And then on the design side, they would need to have, an understanding of design. Um, I think I would prefer to go after degreed and certified individuals only just to get it started and off the ground. Of
Hmm.
course, I think long-term vision would be to take from like no experience all the way into Web3. But just to launch it, I think it's really important that it's Web 2 to Web 3 for degreed and certified professionals.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And just to wrap up then, can we go back to this neon then? So why is it that Web3 always use neon in design?
That's a great question. So this is my opinion, but I think, there's a couple things going on.
It's your
It's
expert
just
opinion, we should say.
it is my expert opinion. There's a high contrast in neon, right? So it creates this instantly almost like gamified user experience, which I would say a lot of the people in Web3 come from that gaming background, right? These are
Mm,
like your closet gamers, in my opinion. So they will draw people in with that neon. It's also memorable, right? If you look at all the corporations out there, none of them really use neon if you're thinking traditional corporations. So being in Web3 using neon, it's super memorable. It just sticks. Polka dot, hot pink, kraken, this bright purple, right? Like these are colors that stick in your brain. Even Coinbase uses almost like a neon blue. Um, and then I think it's just almost goes to that like disruptive piece, right? It's using neon in a corporate application is disruptive, which I think is a core tenet to some degree of the industry, right? They want to disrupt people's understanding of money and all these systems. And so I think using neon achieves that.
mm. As if somebody wants to follow in your footsteps, because it's fascinating how you view the world. It's like very obvious that you look at things differently to other people because you're looking at them from a very design focused um, mindset. But if somebody kind of really resonates with that, what would you recommend in terms of a career path if they actually want to follow you in your footsteps? 'Cause, I mean, you've had an awesome variety of stuff to go from being a barista to executive assistant to then doing this is and I know you obviously said you did a degree in graphic design, but what would you recommend if somebody was starting out and they're like, hey, I really want to do this?
Specifically for Web3.
I mean, I think everything's probably going to be Web3, so
Yeah, that's a great call out. Gosh, I hate to be like, oh, go get your degree, because that's not attainable for everybody. I think it's just pay more attention to what works around you, what doesn't, what catches your attention and what doesn't, and start to ask why, become curious why that billboard makes you go, ugh, and that other billboard makes you want to like drive back by. I think that being curious in day-to-day life helps you kind of analyze the underlying user experience. And practicing that will just make it become an intuitive thing.
Mm, that's very good advice. Okay,
Hmm.
well, I will make sure that I get the links for your magazine done, and as soon as you've got that sign up list, let me know
Yes.
because then we can include that in the post as well. That would be awesome. Thank you so much, Billy. This has been so interesting. I
Thank
love how you
you.
think.
Thank you. Thank you for
I
having me
really
here.
do.
Thanks for putting Access Tribe together. That has
Oh,
been awesome.
my pleasure. No, I love it. It means I get to talk about Bitcoin all day.
Yeah, right. Which is all we really want to do anyway.
Any excuse.
Yeah, no, thank you truly for having me. I appreciate it. The
Yeah,
community
thank you.
you
And I
built
hope to
is
see you
amazing.
in person in Texas at some point. So,
Yes.
yeah, I'm going to try and make NAB this year. I tried to do it last year and I couldn't. So, I'm really going to put my effort into
Okay.
being there. So, fingers crossed. I'm guessing you'll be there and I'm hoping you'll be doing all their
Yeah.
designs as well. So, I shall endeavor to be there and
Yeah.
hopefully we can actually hang in person
We
finally.
will and we are. Yeah, that would be awesome. Let me know. But also let me know if you go to any other of the big conferences. We'll
I'm
likely
I'm
be there as well.
99% sure I'll be in Vegas. So that one I'm
I
definitely gonna
figured.
do. So yeah, so
Okay.
okay, well that's probably sooner then, so we'll probably see each other there then.
I hope so. I hope so. Well, thank you. Have a good day.